After his wife's funeral, the husband and his mistress went to the notary for his wife's inheritance. But when they arrived, hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Jack married Rachel 3 years ago. Honestly, he wouldn't have married her if she hadn't become the sole owner of her father's business after his sudden death. Her father, a seemingly young and strong businessman, had unexpectedly passed away due to a stroke. Rachel was Mr. Monroe's only child and sole heir to his fortune. This is why Jack, a handsome and lazy man accustomed to living off women, took an interest in her. Rachel was charmed by Jack's promises while he planned to stay with her until a more lucrative opportunity arose. But soon, he realized that the best option, the prize of his life, was Rachel. She inherited her father's colossal wealth, and Jack knew exactly how to take advantage of it. He believed he could easily manipulate her deep affection for him to control her fortune, and everything was going perfectly for Jack. The girl was deeply mourning her father, who had been her pillar of support and the most significant person in her life. So, Jack quickly surrounded Rachel with care and support during such a difficult time. The young and naive girl had no idea that the worst moment of her life had led Jack to hide his true nature even more, at least until they were married. Jack maintained his good behavior, ensuring there was no turning back. After the funeral, he proposed marriage, suggesting, of course, that they wait until her mourning period for her father ended. Jack was skilled in deception, manipulation, and pretense. He could become whoever he needed to be and do whatever was expected of him. With his rich girlfriends, he usually didn't put in much effort, thinking there would always be another wealthy woman. But with Rachel, the effort would be worth it. The efforts would not be in vain, and the astute man understood this clearly. However, the first obstacle for him arose unexpectedly from a source he couldn't have foreseen. Rachel's father had a best friend who was also his principal assistant in the company and Rachel's godfather, Mr. Langford. He immediately realized that Rachel was hopelessly in love and wouldn't be dissuaded from marriage. Her mourning for her father made her seek a substitute, but as a smart and astute man, Mr. Langford verbally insisted on a prenuptial agreement and managed to win Rachel over to his side. "Jack, it's for business. Is it that difficult?" Rachel asked, repeating what Mr. Langford had told her. "This is humiliating. Do you think I need your money?" Jack retorted, indignant at this twist. "Darling, it's just a formality. We only need it in case of a divorce. My godfather wants us to sign it. He has always been like a second father to me." Rachel might have been naive in financial matters, considering she never had to worry about money, but she wasn't foolish in other aspects. When she set a goal, she achieved it, no matter what. Jack was cornered and had to agree to all of Mr. Langford's terms. The marriage contract's formulation was standard, but completely restricted Jack's rights. It was evident that the business and all other properties inherited from Rachel's father could not become joint properties of the spouses. Jack assumed he would receive a share of the dividends and acquire new properties and assets. However, the contract drafted by a top-notch lawyer prevented Jack from having that opportunity. Despite this, Jack believed the marriage would still be beneficial for him as he would have access to his wife's finances without control and accumulate capital for the future. He planned to siphon money from the common budget daily and transfer it to his name. But Jack was wrong in this aspect as well. Mr. Langford was a dedicated, decent, and responsible person who not only controlled Rachel's financial flows in business, but also her personal finances. Jack had limited funds for personal expenses, but he remained optimistic about the future and waited to see how the situation would unfold. Soon, he discovered that his patience was rewarded. Rachel had been trying to conceive since the wedding day. She longed for motherhood, but each new cycle brought bitterness and disappointment. Initially, she attributed it to nerves and the stress caused by the frenetic pace of life. She took over the business and learned a lot along the way, which was naturally exhausting. After more than a year of unsuccessful attempts, the woman sought help from specialists, underwent a complete medical examination, and identified the cause of the failures. Rachel's symptoms, which she had attributed to a hectic lifestyle, turned out to be alarming. Her body was warning her of problems, but she ignored them. Finally, the doctors diagnosed her with cancer. She underwent nearly 2 years of treatment and suffering, but with little success. During this time, Jack played the role of husband only nominally. His vested interest was that Rachel simply didn't exist, and he couldn't hide it well enough. Although they never discussed it openly, Rachel was aware of the numerous women her husband had cheated on her with. Jack believed he was skilled in conspiracy and manipulation, thinking he was successfully playing the role of the husband of a dying wife without arousing suspicion. He felt lucky and thought he only needed to endure a little longer to achieve his desired outcome. However, Jack's behavior was condemned and discussed by everyone, from the nurses in the hospitals where Rachel was treated to Mr. Langford. The man was furious and powerless. He couldn't understand why Rachel desperately wanted to preserve her marriage on her deathbed. He was also concerned that Rachel didn't have a will, and as a result, her husband would automatically become her sole heir. That scoundrel will inherit everything, including the fruits of Rachel's and her father's hard work, lamented Mr. Langford. He was certain that Jack, this spendthrift, would squander all the properties within a few years. However, the elderly man was at a loss on how to broach such a delicate subject with his goddaughter, who had emanated health and youth until recently and now had no chance. She was dying, and it would happen very soon. The countdown was in weeks. Jack was already rubbing his greedy hands, his eyes gleaming with anticipation of getting rid of his sick wife and acquiring solid capital. It seemed to him that the matter was settled. Mr. Langford prayed he wouldn't have to initiate the conversation about the will himself, but fortunately, it wasn't necessary. Rachel started the conversation, revealing a secret plan that left him speechless because she had planned everything meticulously with subtlety and ruthlessness. He never expected that revenge would indeed be a dish best served cold, and Rachel executed it perfectly. The plan Rachel devised and carried out didn't require much effort or time, but as she completed her journey on Earth, she achieved her primary dreams. Unfortunately, Rachel's loved ones didn't witness a miracle, and she passed away without recovering. Before her death, she organized the details of her funeral with great care. Calm and resolute, she conveyed her final wishes. The day after the farewell ceremony, the notary summoned the people mentioned by Rachel in her will and asked them to attend the reading. Jack was shocked by this news. He was certain his wife hadn't drafted any official document in case of her death, and that he would become her sole heir, as the law usually provides in such cases. Still hoping for the best, he went to the appointed meeting, taking his new lover, Stacy, a stunning beauty. Entering the notary's office, Jack spotted Mr. Langford and Rachel's friend, Carl Tress. But what caught him off guard was that Carl wasn't alone. He was pushing a stroller with a boy inside. Jack was completely unaware of Carl's marriage or the child's birth. Although Jack wasn't an expert in any field, he certainly wasn't a fool, and it didn't take long for him to realize that there was a hidden agenda and that he had been deceived. Despite this, curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to know what Rachel had planned, though it was already clear it would be incredibly humiliating for him. For about 15 minutes, everyone remained silent, occupying different corners of the room. No one else arrived. The notary seemed to have deliberately prolonged the introductory part as much as possible, telling them why they had gathered and that it was an honor to read the deceased's last will. The notary announced with a malicious smile, hinting that the will's contents were no secret to him or the others. Finally, Jack heard his name. "To my lawful husband, Jack, I deny the inheritance," read the notary. After uttering this modest and short sentence, the notary looked at Jack and asked if he had understood its essence. The humiliated man had no choice but to nod. At that moment, Stacy took his hand, trying to leave defiantly, but Jack held her in place, ignoring her questioning look. He wanted to leave the scene of his public humiliation as quickly as possible, but the play wasn't over yet, and the invited audience needed to see it through. After a brief pause, the notary continued, "I leave all my personal belongings to my only son, Tommy Tress, until he reaches adulthood. I appoint his father, Carl Tress, and Mr. Langford as guardians and administrators of his estate." A shocking revelation hit Jack like a punch in the stomach. A son of Carl? His patience snapped, and he exploded with a surprised shout. Besides Jack and Stacy, the news was no surprise to anyone present. "The boy is Rachel's biological child?" Jack gasped, raising his voice. "Yes, Tommy is Rachel's biological child with Carl," clarified Mr. Langford. She hasn't been pregnant in the last 2 years. That's impossible. Jack desperately clung to anything, despite realizing that, nowadays, it wasn't necessary to be pregnant to have a child. The godfather smiled, clearly enjoying Jack's shock and disappointment. Today's medical advances are impressive, he commented. While observing this scene, Carl recalled the horror he felt 2 years ago when he discovered that his best friend was gravely ill with little chance of recovery. It was shocking to him how calmly she spoke about her limited time and what she needed to do. That's when she revealed her desire to become a mother, no matter what. I preserved my eggs before starting treatment. They told me I probably wouldn't be able to conceive my child, but I insisted. Carl, I grew up without a mother and know it's not easy, but I always felt your love and protection. Carl cautiously asked, does Jack agree to raise the child alone? Who would allow that? I'd be happy to become the guardian and use the baby's money since he has no awareness, replied Rachel. No, I've realized that my dear spouse has a rather questionable character, to say the least, and his reaction to my diagnosis and prognosis, I don't even want to talk about him. This man doesn't deserve my worry. What about the baby? That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Rachel hesitated, which was quite unusual for her, as she was generally fearless. I don't know how to broach the subject delicately. Maybe there's no delicate way. In short, I'd like you to be the father of my child, she exclaimed in a high-pitched tone. Are you joking? You have a husband, replied Carl, clearly caught off guard. Yes, I have a husband and will have until the day I die. I've already made that decision. Of course, we won't sleep together. It's impossible given my current state. I can't carry the baby, unfortunately. I preserved my eggs, and now we need the biological material of the future father, naturally. We also need a woman to carry and give birth, but fortunately, these services are available now. At first, Carl found this absurd, the musings of a desperate woman, but she had a logical plan in her mind and had already completed a significant amount of preparatory work. She researched the legal aspects, arranged the services of a reproduction clinic, and even found a surrogate mother for the future baby. Carl, I could use a donor's services for the baby's father. I want to leave a part of myself, but when you think about it, who will the baby be with? I've thought a lot, but you're the only one I can trust. Knowing you for so many years, I believe you'll be a great father. I understand you want to form your own family, marry, and have children. It's logical. But please think about it. Don't answer now. For me, after what happened with Jack, the father of my child must be someone who doesn't prioritize money, someone who won't exploit my assets. I'm no longer as naive as before marriage. Jack taught me a lot. Now I have a lot of life experience. As for you, you don't need any money. You have plenty, replied Rachel, correcting her reasoning for the first time. You know you'll succeed. You worked tirelessly to keep the family business thriving. You never needed anything. Now I know for sure that a man who grew up poor will never stop thinking about having enough to eat, and if his decency also falls short, there will be a significant problem. I experienced this firsthand, added the woman sadly. To be honest, I'm completely confused. I had a totally different idea of becoming a father. I need to consult my parents, understand that I can't make such a decision alone. I'll need the help of close family members when I become a father, so I have to inform them and seek their opinion. Rachel had no objections, only asking Carl to promise to keep the information confidential. The conversation with Carl's parents was very difficult. His father accepted everything neutrally, listened to all the explanations, and assured he would support his son's decision and help as much as possible with the grandchild. His mother, however, wasn't as open-minded. Like all mothers, she wanted him to marry a good woman and have children together. She felt immense sympathy for Rachel, knowing her since childhood and holding her in high regard, but this request was very difficult for a mother to accept, that the mother of her grandchild was dying and that the child would be carried by another woman. Can the child inherit the disease? The woman feared this question, finding it terrible, awkward, and out of place. However, how could she ensure her grandchild's safety? Rachel doesn't have a hereditary form of the disease, Carl replied, which reassured the anxious woman to some extent, though not completely. However, after careful consideration, she expressed her support for her son's decision. Carl also struggled with indecision. Rachel's proposal took him by surprise, but after a period of contemplation, he concluded there was no reason to refuse. When he conveyed his approval to Rachel, she was overjoyed, and they began to implement their plan step by step. While Carl reflected on the story that would change his life, Mr. Langford recalled the conversation with Rachel a little over 2 months ago. Starting from afar, she said she honored Mr. Langford as a second father and hoped he wouldn't refuse. Then, she revealed that she wanted him to become her child's guardian. Initially, Mr. Langford thought his goddaughter was delirious, but as Rachel shared the full story, the godfather was in shock. Not only had Rachel and Carl made such a bold decision, but they had also hidden it for so long. "How old is the baby now?" Mr. Langford asked. "Tommy is 8 months old," Rachel smiled. "You two really know how to surprise," Mr. Langford exclaimed, still processing the shock. "I don't want Jack to discover the child before I die. He'll only find out when my will is announced. I've already drafted it, and it's with the notary. However, there's one aspect that still needs to be resolved. Tommy will only have one father. I've reevaluated many aspects of my life and don't want to leave anything to chance. Kurt's parents then, if anything happens to him, Tommy will go to them, but I want you to have rights too, just in case." Being good at understanding people, the elderly man realized it could be very dangerous to act this way with Jack, although Rachel's husband fully deserved this treatment. "Rachel, are you sure you want to treat your husband this way? He's a repugnant man. Getting involved with your means? I mean, why do you need such revenge from beyond the grave?" He expressed his thoughts, then immediately apologized. "Sorry, dear, for being so rude. You know, I've thought about this for 2 years. I witnessed Tommy's birth, saw how Carl loves him and how his parents adore him. I don't need anything else. I've accepted the situation. Currently, I'm much more bothered by those who talk about miraculous recovery and cure. As for Jack, I loved him so deeply, believed in him wholeheartedly, but he turned out to be the most ungrateful of beasts. He comes to the hospital as if it's a hard job. Did you know his girlfriends bring him here?" The elderly man nodded silently, the bitterness evident on his face. "And I should forget this? No. He values money above all else, so that's how I'll punish him. It will be a surprise for him, you'll see. I kept everything a secret from you. It was immensely difficult. I wanted to introduce my son to you immediately, but I was extremely cautious so that no one discovered it accidentally and told Jack. This might be my farewell to him. I even wrote a letter that the notary will deliver." Mr. Langford made several attempts to dissuade his goddaughter. It seemed to him an ill-advised decision, but the woman stood her ground, and he had to relent. After all, it's her final wish, deserving respect. Amid the sudden silence in the notary's office, everyone was immersed in their thoughts. Of course, you don't need to be a seer to guess that Jack cursed Rachel in every possible way. People like him have no idea they might be at fault, and that others' behavior could be a perfectly logical response. However, such introspection is too complex for these people. Why bother looking for problems within oneself? Strangely, it was Stacy who broke the silence. She tried to grab her lover by the elbow to lead him out. However, Jack had no intention of leaving as he hadn't finished speaking. "Are you sure I don't have any right to anything, not even a mandatory share, or whatever it's called? I'm the husband, after all," shouted the man. Even Stacy winced at such behavior, let alone the others present. Only the notary, accustomed to such conduct, remained impassive. "According to the will, you're not included in the circle of people entitled to a mandatory share of the inheritance. Moreover, I carefully studied your marriage contract. Its text is attached here." The notary patted the thick folder in front of him. "You have no chance, even by appealing to the courts, although you naturally retain the right to such an appeal." "I'll contest this. It's not clear who this illegitimate child is." Jack started to ramble, not realizing what he was saying. Carl struggled to hold back from punching the arrogant man. Even the usually calm Mr. Langford turned red with anger. Only the notary remained as calm as a python. For him, this was a typical workday, and nothing was surprising. He responded calmly. "Attached here are not only the child's birth certificate, but also the medical documents providing clear answers about his birth. Moreover, as per the deceased request, DNA test results confirm that your wife is Tommy Tress's biological mother. I must inform you that all the documents were gathered thoroughly and meticulously. Can I see? Jack wanted to see the evidence. No, you can only review the part that concerns you. All other documents, especially those regarding the child, can only be disclosed with the parent's consent, of course. I do not permit, Carl immediately intervened. Then it's only possible in a court process if the court deems it necessary to require those documents. That was the last straw for Jack. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him, promising not to let this matter rest. His lover, however, was more polite. She said goodbye and left quietly, closing the door behind her. Does it matter that he didn't sign that the will was read to him? Mr. Langford asked the notary. There are many like him. It's no more than a formality, the notary reassured him. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. I still don't understand how Rachel got involved with him, Mr. Langford said aloud, but his question remained rhetorical. The men quickly signed the necessary documents and shook hands. Mr. Langford helped Carl put little Tommy in the stroller. Do you want to join us? I want to take a walk and get some fresh air. It's good for the baby, Carl asked. Certainly, I'll accompany you for a while, Mr. Langford agreed. They walked in silence, listening to the stroller's wheels noise. Do you think Rachel would be satisfied with how I'm handling things? Carl finally asked, expressing what had been bothering him. I'm sure she would be. You're a wonderful father, and it's evident how much you mean to each other, Rachel's godfather reassured him. To be honest, there's one thing I can't get out of my head. You know, I think Rachel told you that I advised against what just happened in the notary's office. Talking about this circus with the will, and how Jack found out about Tommy. Mr. Langford nodded in response. Of course, Carl replied. I was the one who constantly brought up the conversation about this. I didn't like this idea from the start. He's a nasty type, angry, stupid, and mercenary. Why provoke him? Honestly, I even thought about telling him when the baby was already born that Rachel was hiding so much. I believed I had no right to. I decided she simply didn't want to deal with him alone and left these disputes to us. Today, I saw him with that woman, with no shame at all. Now I wonder if I did the right thing by not insisting on my position. His reaction, the expression on his face, was terrible. It would have been better to get rid of him earlier. I think Rachel didn't want it either. That also played a role. And the revenge. She wanted revenge because she loved, regardless of what she said afterward. She loved deeply, and that corrupted love found no other outlet. My poor girl. The elderly man wiped away a tear streaming down his cheek. Don't worry about her. She asked us not to. She asked us to direct all our love that was for her to Robbie. Carl comforted Rachel's godfather. While the men reminisced, Jack watched from the car, discussing the same subject. So, you won't get anything, right? The girl asked, incredulous, blinking rapidly. You're an idiot. You heard there's no chance because of this discovery. Right, let's go. We need to grab at least something valuable and take it to my apartment. 3 days later, Carl finally gathered the courage to visit Rachel's house, only to find it empty. He had prepared for a confrontation and even hired 2 bodyguards for his protection, but Jack hit the jackpot and returned to his home, of course, not forgetting to take many valuable items with him. Now Jack was sitting alone in the small kitchen of his tiny apartment, sipping some whiskey that Stacy had left him, which was quite expected. Why would she need a destitute man? Jack pondered his current situation. He couldn't help but reflect on how he had ended up there. Before, women paid to be with him, but now he had to offer money to a pretty young girl to stay in his company. Ironically, Jack, a gigolo past his prime, deteriorated by his vices, didn't blame himself for his circumstances. In his thoughts, his wife was the villain who drained his vitality and destroyed his hopes, leaving him without the inheritance he had eagerly awaited. In his fantasies, he was young, handsome, successful, and extremely wealthy, but as a final blow, Stacy told him some harsh truths. Nobody needed him. He was just a poor drunk living in illusions of grandeur. It was very hard to accept this reality. His dreams of wealth and success, largely dependent on his ex-wife, crumbled like a house of cards. His aspirations to be a successful businessman were destroyed. Blinded by his ego, he didn't see his part in his downfall. Instead, he blamed his deceased wife. In his mind, Jack saw himself as a saint who never left his sick wife alone, conveniently ignoring his numerous affairs, alcohol abuse, and disdainful behavior towards his wife. What a pity she's dead, and I can't hit her, he thought many times. I barely held back, encouraging myself that my patience would be generously rewarded. Jack spent nearly 2 weeks in a drinking spree, seeking to escape reality, and his resentment grew each day. During a sad, hungover morning, he decided he had had enough. He realized he couldn't achieve success or revenge against Rachel by drinking. Jack felt deeply humiliated a few days earlier. Men sent by Mr. Langford arrived and practically forced him to hand over the car keys, tearing up the power of attorney Rachel had given him. Didn't you know the power of attorney loses its legal force after the person who issued it dies? One of the men said derogatorily. Now, sober, Jack began to ponder how he would take revenge on Rachel and what he should do next. Initially, he wanted to desecrate her grave, but then, contemplating what was dear to Rachel and what would cause the most suffering, he saw another answer: Tommy. Jack was hit by a wave of electricity when this idea came to mind. He laughed maliciously, finally devising his revenge plan. Of course, there were many problems to solve and structure, but he decided on the main thing. He wouldn't harm Tommy. What is a mother's worst nightmare? Not being able to help her child in distress. That's exactly what he decided to do. The plan from his inflamed imagination was simple: kidnap the baby, take him far away, and leave him in an orphanage. After a week of vengeful thoughts and fantasies about this, Jack felt a satisfaction in his soul, if he had won. He hadn't smiled like this in a long time. It's true that such an expression looked quite intimidating and frightening, but Rachel's husband didn't care at all. You could even say he was happy while thinking about all the details. He experienced euphoria. The object of his hatred wasn't nearby, but Jack eagerly imagined how Rachel would have suffered from her inability to help her child. Once he decided on the plan theoretically, he began to think about the practical side. He needed to learn everything about Tommy's movements and who took him out of the house to perfectly choose the place and time for his crime. Jack knew Carl well in his past and was even familiar with his parents, having visited their home. He also knew that the elite suburban settlement had reinforced security. As Jack began contemplating his plan, he realized the challenges. Jack was determined to proceed with his plan despite the challenges he would face. He spent days observing from the forest with binoculars, studying the child's daily routine and movements. Is the game worth the candle? Jack questioned himself. Absolutely. His mental state visibly deteriorated after the will announcement. She ruined my life, and I will ruin her son's life, he murmured with a malicious laugh. If an indifferent person were near Jack at that moment, they would have noticed the drastic changes in his behavior and perhaps encouraged him to seek help. Unfortunately, the story does not entertain hypotheses. Jack was relentless in achieving his goals. Once he had a plan, no matter how foolish it seemed, he saw it through to the end. He spent days preparing the necessary conditions, exploring the entire territory to find the perfect viewpoint to observe Carl's house while remaining hidden. For more than a week, Jack would rise at dawn and rush to the settlement, staying there until late at night, keeping constant surveillance with binoculars and meticulously recording every activity in the house. He diligently kept a notebook to ensure he didn't miss anything. Through his observations, Jack learned that the child was cared for by Carl's mother and a nanny. However, Carl and his mother were unsuitable for Jack's plans. Both knew him well and could identify him immediately. Jack had no intention of being caught or punished for the crime he was planning. Jack meticulously planned his attack, anticipating that the police would come to him with questions, but he hoped to deflect them. In his plan, the nanny was chosen as the target of the attack. She had a fixed schedule and always walked with Tommy in the same places and routes. Luck favored Jack on a Wednesday during the nanny's daytime walk with the baby, who slept peacefully. She left the secure area of the settlement, following a small path in the forest to a clearing where another nanny from a nearby settlement met her. They chatted, and Jack even heard their laughter. To avoid drawing attention, Jack decided to stop observing the settlement daily and only visit on Wednesdays, trying to coincide with the nanny's daytime walk. Everything was precise as clockwork. Every Wednesday, the nanny left the safety of the settlement and walked along the forest path. For 4 consecutive Wednesdays, he observed the system to ensure it didn't fail. On the 4th Wednesday, he knew he would return the following week at the same time to take the child. To execute his plan, he bought a powerful taser at a local market, paying in cash to avoid being traced. He meticulously planned every detail to avoid being captured. Similarly, he bought an old car, stole plates, and attached them to the vehicle. He strategically determined where to park the car so that it was close enough to escape, but not so close as to draw attention. He also considered his appearance, taking measures to disguise his figure and face to avoid recognition. Thoughts of kidnapping consumed him. He went to sleep and woke up with these thoughts, even dreaming about the act in precise detail. As the designated day approached, he lost nearly 7 kilograms and became a shadow of his former self. One look at him was enough to see that he was a man to be feared. Traces of neurosis and obsession began to etch themselves onto his face. On Wednesday, he parked at the pre-selected spot and waited. When he saw the nanny pushing the stroller along the path, he trembled. The extensive planning disconnected him from the reality of his imminent actions. He was about to confront a stranger, attack her with a taser, take the child from the stroller, and flee to his car. Jack had imagined the situation differently, more like a scene from a video game. Here, however, everything was real. The woman, the baby, and the stroller. The baby examined the surroundings with curiosity. By nature, Jack wasn't violent, and crossing this line was difficult for him, but his deep hatred for Rachel drove him to carry out his plan. He approached the nanny of the boy, pushed her away from the stroller, and knocked her down. Then he used a taser on her, and she passed out from the shock. All that remained was to take the child from the stroller and run to the car. However, things went wrong at this point. As he bent down to unfasten the belts, he suddenly felt a blow to the head and fell to the ground. The next thing he knew, an elderly man was standing over him, scolding Jack and tying his hands. Jack lost consciousness again. The mysterious man turned out to be a well-known forest ranger in the nearby elite communities. His ranger house was practically in the middle of 2 neighboring settlements, often hidden by dense vegetation and unnoticed by Jack. That day, Mr. Turner was returning from the local store when he noticed suspicious activity. Later, he explained to the police officer, "I saw someone on guard, dressed entirely in black despite the morning heat. I decided to watch for a bit and investigate." Due to his many years as a forest ranger, Mr. Turner was skilled at moving silently through the forest to avoid alarming wildlife. He hid behind a tree and kept a close eye. Suddenly, I saw a man attack a woman, knocking her down. Initially, I thought he intended to rob her, but he was trying to reach the child. I ran and hit him with a stick I had picked up, just in case, explained Mr. Turner. Well done, Mr. Turner. You've become a local hero. Look, the press is already gathering. They want to interview you. Sign this police report and enjoy your newfound fame, said one of the officers. I'm not going to them. I don't care about that sort of thing, Mr. Turner replied calmly, returning to his house via an indirect path so no one would follow him. Mr. Turner didn't feel he had done anything extraordinary. He believed anyone would have acted similarly in his position. How could he not help when those who couldn't defend themselves were in danger? A few hours later, Carl arrived at Mr. Turner's house. Hello, I'm the father of the boy you rescued today. He's a good kid. He calmed down as soon as I picked him up. Such a brave and smart boy. Thank you very much. It's a blessing you were there in time. We're very grateful you didn't just pass by, said Carl, on the verge of tears, overwhelmed by emotions. The day had been incredibly intense, leaving him emotionally shaken. Tell me, how can I thank you? What are you talking about? There's no need to thank me. Mr. Turner was genuinely surprised to be thanked for his actions. However, Carl persisted. Well, if you insist, a new hunting outfit and maybe some food for my dog would be appreciated. Of course, no problem, Mr. Turner replied. By the way, if you don't mind me asking, was all this done for money? The curious forest ranger asked. Oh, unfortunately, it's much more complicated than that, Carl replied. Well, feel free to share if it's not too much trouble. I live somewhat isolated here, in an information vacuum, so to speak, Mr. Turner encouraged. Carl began recounting the disconnected events of the past few years, including Rachel's illness, the unconventional paternity decision, her subsequent death, and the revenge against her husband. The investigator informed me that Jack was deeply hurt as everyone assumed his actions were solely motivated by greed. He was consumed by revenge, Carl explained. Carl felt relieved when Mr. Turner asked about this complex story. He was eager to share it with someone, seeking an impartial perspective from a stranger. He wondered if they had driven Jack to a state of madness and vengeance, and, if it were just about himself, Carl wouldn't suffer so much reflexively, but everything he and Rachel did came back to the boy. Carl added after finishing his story. Carl turned to Mr. Turner, an impartial observer, and asked, "Do you think we pushed him to this point? Are we responsible for his desire for revenge?" "Oh boy, are you serious? You're an adult and talking this nonsense? That Jack of yours always found a reason. He didn't even need one. He married for money, blatantly cheated, mistreated his sick wife, and convinced himself it was all her fault. Her fault for retaliating once, for losing patience, for not enduring. Oh, she hit the most painful thing for him, the wallet. On the contrary, well done. The woman thought of a plan and executed it." Mr. Turner replied with a harsh truth from a stranger's perspective, which really lifted Carl's spirits. Carl reflected deeply on every word Mr. Turner had said. "Now I also owe you for your good advice," Carl smiled in response. The forest ranger just waved his hand at him, and they said goodbye as friends. Mr. Turner promised to check on the boy. "I heard somewhere that they have this belief or wisdom, God knows what to call it, that if you save someone's life, you're responsible for that person forever. So, don't worry about your Tommy. I'll look after him here too," said the forest ranger as a farewell. True to his word, he regularly visited Carl's house and was always a welcome guest. In him, the boy found another loving family member. Meanwhile, the court sentenced Jack to several years in prison. During this long period, everyone in the house managed to calm down and return to their usual peaceful life. The family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Mr. Langford visited regularly and took care of the boy, diligently fulfilling the duties assigned to him by his goddaughter. Carl met a single mother whose daughter attended the same kindergarten group as Tommy. The children got along well, and Carl's parents hoped this time their son's personal life would flourish and that Tommy would have a loving stepmother and a sister, maybe even more than one sister. But, of course, as Carl promised Rachel, he would never let Tommy forget his mother. He always talked about her, showed the boy pictures and videos, constantly reminding him that his mother loved him very much and that she was always with him, protecting and caring for him, even if he couldn't see her. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.